morning, Secretary Arkoosh, Director Gilligan, and to your entire team that's here today, thank you. We appreciate having this conversation. I would like to follow up on your conversation with my colleague with regard to these 1115 waivers. I'm hearing things that are good, right? I'm hearing that you want to be collaborative. I'm hearing that you have some good number projections, but I think there's also some concern there. And I appreciate what Director Gilligan said when she said that when federal dollars go away, if there's still a need, the state is going to have to backfill those dollars. So I'm concerned. I know you answered a lot of questions with regard to the current year budget that we're in, next year's budget, but I'm concerned looking down the road. Now, we know that with those Section 1115 waivers, previously the federal government required that they be revenue neutral, and now that has changed. So there's no need to be revenue neutral. This is a complex waiver that you have submitted. You continue to talk about savings with the Corrections Department, but there's a lot more to what you applied for than just the medically assisted treatment for the Department of Corrections, correct?
Oh, yeah. I'm happy to talk about any aspect of it you'd like.
Will every other aspect see that type of saving?
So I think one way to think about this is what's already happening here on the ground in Pennsylvania. So in our Medicaid program, one of the ways that we have been able to keep that low growth rate is that when the Medicaid rates are calculated
in number of users or growth rate in spending?
Spend, because we can't, the number of users, we don't control that, right? It's an entitlement. So if you qualify, you are covered by Medicaid. So the way that we've been able to keep that low growth spend rate is working with managed care organizations, as you know. And when the annual rate setting is done every year for the rates for our MCOs, one of the elements that goes into that rate setting are something that we call efficiencies. And what that means in English is that MCOs are held responsible for avoidable hospitalizations, avoidable emergency room use from their members, and they are penalized for that. In response to that, our managed care organizations are doing the things that are in this 1115 waiver. They are starting to provide nutritional meals, medically tailored meals for folks with newly diagnosed diabetes or high blood pressure. They are starting to set up housing programs to keep people stably housed because they know, our MCOs here in Pennsylvania, they are finding that these things work, and so they want us to do them broadly. Okay, and this is how we keep that rate of spend down.
So can you quantify for us what we're going to spend and what we're going to save? Because, I mean, here's the deal. The governor's budget proposal, as far as we can tell, spends down our general fund reserves and effectively all of our rainy day funds by fiscal year 28-29. Correct?
I believe that's what's in the governor's budget, yes.
So how are we expected to pay for any of these new initiatives, assuming that the federal government approves them, because not everyone has this 98% rate that you continue to talk about with the Department of Corrections?
So I can't tell you what it's going to cost today because we don't know what the populations are that will end up being what's called the target populations. That's part of the negotiation with CMS. But when we do have that information, we will come back to you and be able to talk to you about what we believe it will cost. And I just have to add, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but what's important, the way to think about this is about ensuring that we can keep that rate of spend down at that 2.5% level in Medicaid. If we don't have more tools in our toolbox, that is very likely to rise. And that is a program where people are entitled to it.
My concern is you still don't have the answer about how big the spend is going to be to get the savings that you hypothesize we will get. Because the question for us sitting here is how big will the fiscal year 28-29 deficit be if the federal government approves the department's entire waiver? And so if we assume that it's approved by the federal government and approved by the General Assembly, using the governor's revenue and spending projections as our starting point, the deficit basically for the general fund, wouldn't that deficit be part of the general fund cost of this proposal through 28-29, since the governor's plan as he proposed it takes away all of those rainy day funds and general fund reserves?
Senator, I can't answer that question yet because it's hypothetical. That's why it's not in the budget that you're voting on. There is nothing in the budget that you're voting on that includes this 1115.
But you're going
when
down
we
the
have
path.
actual numbers, but we have submitted a waiver to CMS. As I mentioned earlier, we are not creating an entitlement. We are not required to spend those funds. And we still don't know exactly what that program could potentially look like. That's why it's not in the budget. But as soon as we do know, we will come back, absolutely, and start those conversations.
Here's some things to think about. Your revenue estimates are $8 billion higher. The governor's revenue estimates are $8 billion higher than the IFO told us. So we know from testimony from other agencies' hearings that the governor's underspending or understating his spending projections. So if the federal government approves this waiver, we have no idea. It could be an extensive cost, which isn't budgeted in those 5-year projections that we receive from your department. I've appreciated this conversation very much, but I still have a lot of concern about an 1115 waiver that we have absolutely no idea what path we're going to go down. The independent fiscal office is indicating that we are going to be in a difficult scenario. There are differences in numbers, governor overstating revenue, understating expenses. My concern is that if you continue to press for this proposal, you're basically going to take away our ability to manage our finances. So again, I appreciate you being here and strongly encourage you to continue to have conversations with the General Assembly and not usurp that spending power. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I've made that commitment, and it is not in the budget that you're voting on. Just want to be clear about that.